Proverbs chapter 20. And if you have your notes from last week, we are continuing with those same notes. But Proverbs chapter 20. And last week we were looking at just a few items that are really going to hurt your wisdom. And so we were walking through this idea. So Proverbs chapter 20. Okay, I am on. All right, so let's start off. Proverbs chapter 20. Let's start off with verse 1. And last week, we got through a whopping 2 verses of Proverbs chapter 20. Lord willing, tonight we'll get through a few more, but we'll see how well we go. Verse number 1, it says this. It says, wine is a mocker, strong drink is raging, and whosoever is deceived thereby is not wise. So last week, we were looking at that idea of alcohol. And really, beyond just alcohol, anything that's going to impair your judgment, anything that's going to distract you, that is something that the Bible is pointing out here to say it is a destructive thing to get involved in. You've got to be careful. You've got to be on just your senses activated. I didn't use this illustration last week, but you'll notice that a lot of the times when I discuss alcohol, I approach it from the topic of, yes, there is a moral component to it, and we do need to take that moral component. Almost every time the Bible talks about alcohol, it's in a negative sense. But last week, we looked at a few of the verses that seem to discuss it in a positive sense. And I said, okay, so let's take the moral component out of the discussion for now. Let's just talk about the wisdom of this situation. And I didn't use the illustration, but I want to think about it like this. I compare alcohol to leaving a loaded firearm sitting on your table. Okay? Think about it. Is that a wise choice? No. Now, let's just say, because like I said, there are a few verses, and we looked at why they are there. But let's say those few verses that are there justified it. Is it still a wise thing to do? No. And so that's this idea that we have to approach alcohol with the danger that it poses, the extremely deadly danger that it poses. And so even if you could have all the defensive reasons for why it's okay to do, okay, you would never leave a loaded gun. Even if that was okay, it would still be a foolish thing to do. And then especially you would not leave it lying out where a kid or someone else could access it. We've got to understand that some of these things we deal with have the danger level of that, and we don't treat them with that level of respect. Okay? I've told you the story. I had a .40 cal pistol years ago, and I had brought it out to the gun range, and I was shooting, trying to take care of some items at camp. And so I was like, okay, I can take care of these by shooting these things. And so I brought it out, and we're just doing some target practice. Totally failed. Did not work the way I thought it was. So I used up all my ammo, and I needed to take that gun home. So I had my Jeep, and we were just driving from this part of camp property to that part of camp property. And I took that firearm, and I set it down on the seat of the Jeep, and I covered it up so no one could see it. It was empty. I made sure it was empty. I looked. I made sure there was no round in the chain. I mean, there's a system that I go through, and I made sure, and I was like, there is nothing in this gun. I know that for a fact. I know the clip is empty, the magazine is empty. I know the chamber's empty. There is no way this could hurt anyone. Set it down, still covered it up. That way nobody gets distracted. Well, some of my students came up, and they were needing my Jeep. And so I said, oh, you know what? My house is right there. I'll just walk home and get my other car. You guys can take my Jeep and go. Well, one of them finds that pistol lying on the seat. Now again, this comes down to they did not have the wisdom to know the danger of what they were holding. They didn't understand firearm safety. They didn't understand you never point a firearm at someone you don't intend to destroy. They just used it like it was a toy. And one of my students literally picked the gun up and handed it to me, pointing it straight at me. Now again, I had cleared it. I knew it was safe, but I was still like, oh no, what are you doing? We understand that with firearms. We understand that natural hesitation and fear, even with something that we know is not loaded. There's just a natural fear of, listen, this is dangerous, and on the off chance I made a mistake, I don't want this thing pointed at me. But then when it comes to some of these substances that could really mess with us, we don't treat them with the same level of respect. Now, that's why the Bible, like 99% of the time, is going to say, it's like, don't do this. Like, why are you doing, But again, we don't treat it with the respect. We think, I can handle it. I'm fine. And that's why Proverbs has to point out that wine is a mocker, Strong drink is raging, and if you are tricked by it, if you're deceived by it, that shows a lack of wisdom. And so, again, we have to take that warning to say, if every single verse talking about a substance is basically saying, don't do it. Why? It's because it's extremely dangerous, and the ability to abuse it is that bad. And again, that's moral component aside. That's just the wisdom component. And that's what this verse is trying to get at. Okay? The next one we talked about was this idea of arrogance. And so we talked about alcohol, or really anything that could control your mind can become a god. We talked about the idea of arrogance can become a god in itself as well. And the arrogance comes along with, you can't tell me what to do. And this arrogant ticks in, and it says, the fear of the king is as the roaring of a lion. Whoso provoketh him to anger sinneth against his own soul. And so it's this idea of just warning us to say, listen, yes, you have rights. Yes, you have privileges. Yes, you have abilities. Yes, you have all that stuff. But you've just got to understand who you're messing with. Just be careful. And so I think it's important to understand that several of these verses, they're not dealing with the morality of the situation either way. Several other verses are doing that. This is just simply saying, morality aside, you're putting yourself in an extremely dangerous situation. Don't go there. So when it comes to alcohol, don't go there. When it comes to the arrogance that would lift you up against a king, this is a king who has the power going, you understand what you're about to get into, right? Be careful. And that's where he's saying, like, sometimes you have to understand, as much as we hate it. I mean, we're America, we're like, we don't listen to any king. Okay, whatever. But the fact is, there is authority over us, and we have to understand that when you choose to defy authority, there are some natural consequences. Whether right or wrong, there are consequences to that decision. And there's a humility we have to approach things with. Now, this then leads to verse number 3. And I don't have a good A-sounding word to go with this one. So I'm just going to call it the idea of the absolute need to know. All right? And so this is the idea of being a busybody. And the Bible is going to warn against this. If you look at Proverbs chapter 20, verse 3, it says this, it is honor for a man to cease from strife, but what? But every fool will be meddling. Okay, what is this one trying to say? It's saying that if you are someone who comes along and it's not your business and you choose to insert yourself, you're foolish. I call this one, you'll see it there, it is the grab the dog by the ears principle. Now, I get this one. Look at Proverbs chapter 26. Proverbs chapter 26, look at verse 17. I want you to see this one. This one's kind of fun. Proverbs 26, 17. I don't know if you've ever had a dog before. I used to have a Cocker Spaniel. And my Cocker Spaniel, you know how Cocker Spaniels, they have like the big, long, floppy ears. Super cute little dogs. But what we would do is we would mess with that Cocker Spaniel by grabbing her front paws. So you'd grab her front paws, and she'd immediately try to bite you in the hand. And then you'd be like this, and then she'd like ignore it. And then you grab her by the paws again, and she'd try to bite your hand. And you just, that's how we would play with her. And so the idea is, if you grab a dog by any part of that dog will immediately try to bite you at that part of the dog. So that little Cocker Spaniel, we'd come up behind her, and she'd be minding her own business. We'd be like, and like you'd get her on her backside, and she'd immediately like spin around and try to, we were all playing. I don't know that she was always playing. I got bit many a time. But you know what happens when you walk up and you grab a dog by the paws, the dog's like, ah. And whether they're playing or not, the idea is, now I want you to imagine that you have now walked up to a dog and you have grabbed the dog by both of the dog's ears at the same time. Okay. Now, if you grab a dog by the paws, obviously the dog is going to immediately bite you in the hands. If you grab the dog by the haunches, the dog's going to immediately spin around and bite you in the hand. But if somehow you can manage to grab the dog by both ears at the same time, that dog is going to be absolutely ticked, and that dog is going to try and probably succeed, but maybe not, and it will try to bite you. I want you to see this proverb because this is the illustration that Solomon is using in Proverbs 26:17. He says this, he that passeth by. So you're walking along, This has nothing to do with you, and you're like, oh, I bet I should go stick my nose in this one. He that passeth by and meddleth with strife, belonging not to him. So what this is not saying, so I'm a pastor, sometimes. There's problems I can't avoid. Okay? There's situations that as much as I would love for me to go, that's not my problem. Okay, it's taking place in my church. It's taking place among my congregation. It actually has become my problem. That's not what this is talking about. This is not me or the deacon stepping in to say, hey, you're in sin, you need to make it right. That's not what this is talking about. This is talking about you're walking along and you're like, looks like somebody needs my help. And we've all had those type of people who are just very curious about what's going on around them. We call them busybodies. We typically tell them to go away. And that's what this is talking about. This is not, this is my responsibility and I have to deal with it. This has absolutely nothing to do with me. And I'm inserting myself into it because I just want to know. And that's why the Bible says, he that passeth by and meddleth with an affair that is not his, the strife that's not his, says he is like a man that takes the dog by the ears. Now again, wisdom says, first of all, don't get involved in things that don't concern you. There are going to be aspects that are just simply, that's not your business. Has nothing to do with you. And I don't think that's wrong to have us understand. I'm at the point now where I have so much information thrown at me, I wish I could play that card more often. I'd be like, not my problem. Had nothing to do with me. You take that to someone else. Okay. That's what I've kind of liked about this whole situation. I can send as much to Mike as I was like, hey, it's Mike's issue. It's Mike's problem. All right. And I can't say enough. I have appreciated Mike and what he has done. Right. And there's so much that I can say. It's not my call. Now, I ultimately realize the buck ultimately stops with me because, I'm the leader. But there's so much that I can just say, hey, I don't know, pass it off. But there are some people who absolutely must be involved in absolutely everything. And the Bible says if you're one of those people, you've got to be careful. Because if you meddle with strife that has nothing to do with you, you are setting yourself up because, first of all, congratulations. You're now locked in until that dog calms down, which means it probably will never calm down. That dog, you got it by the ears. I don't know of a dog that's going to calm down. You're stuck. The moment you grab on to both ears, you're in it. Congratulations. You've got a new problem that you did not want to have. You just wanted to know what was going on. Now it's your problem. So that's what I think we need to understand. First of all, when you meddle with strife that's not yours, has nothing to do with you, you're in for the long haul. Also, you're probably now getting hurt by it. So that's the idea. You grabbed on, you're in for the long haul, but now you're needlessly getting hurt when you didn't need to be. And so we just have to understand the wisdom of that. And so that's what the principle is. You grab the dog by the ears, you don't get to decide when to let go. That dog decides when you let go. And it's probably going to hurt. And so I want you to see that because, again, you just have to understand when we talk through things that alcohol is going to be something that hurts you. Arrogance is going to be something that hurts you. This need to know, you just absolutely, you're walking into a danger zone. And so that's why I think it's important to say, it is honor for every man to cease from strife. Now, it is the honor of a king to search out the matter because that's the king's business. But there's a bunch of us who are not kings, who don't need to know what a king needs to know. And again, this is this idea, because I don't know if you... Sometimes we think that the more I know, the more honor I deserve. The more things I know about, the more pies I've got my finger in. And this is trying to say, listen, if you give into alcohol, you think it's going to make you friends and you think it's going to help, it's actually going to shame you. You think standing up against the king is going to bring you honor and glory and all, it's going to hurt you. You think that knowing everything going on and you're meddling with everyone's affairs is going to, actually it's honor to cease from that. So what these passages are doing is they're taking all of our way of thinking and just kind of turning it on its head. And it's saying the safest, most honorable route that you can take is to avoid these things. Now let's look at one more. We'll see what we have time for. But if you look at the next passage here, The next passage is this idea in verse 4. Verse 4, it says this, "The sluggard will not plow by reason of the cold. Therefore shall he beg in harvest and have nothing." You hop down to verse 13. It says, "Love not sleep, lest thou come to poverty. Open thine eyes, and thou shalt be satisfied with bread." So you'll see a connection between some of these verses. I'm not going over every single one. I've given you the handout. You can look at all these other connections. But one thing I want you to understand is this idea that leisure and rest is something that God has given to us as a reward for work. It's not the idea, there was an old song when I was in college, and it was like working for the weekend, and it was that old song, and it was the idea of like, I just put up with work so that I can relax on the weekend. And then it comes back to the idea of like, well, after a certain amount of money I've earned, I'll just stop working and I'll just live off the money I earned. Okay, that's actually a very unbiblical mindset, because God has given us the responsibility to work. In fact, he makes some pretty sharp condemnations for those who refuse to work. Has nothing to do with the amount of money you make. Has nothing to do with whether you have enough. God has commanded work, and leisure, rest, is a reward for that work. We should not live for leisure. We should not live just to rest and have it. Like, leisure is a reward. And you'll see it here. The sluggard will not plow by reason of the cold. And so a sluggard, someone who looks out there, sees a little bit of difficulty in the work that he's got to go do, and he goes, "Oh, I'll do it some other time." And it says, "Therefore, he shall have, in the harvest, he'll have nothing." And then you see that other verse that ties into this, "Love not sleep." Well, sleep is needed. Like, we have to sleep. I don't know if you realize that. Your body has a way of shutting you down if you choose not to sleep. All right, and you stay up really, really late, and then your body's like, "Oh, guess what? I'm taking over now." And you shut down. So sleep is good. Sleep is good, just like food is good, just like all this other stuff is good. In fact, work is good. Rest is good. But you don't live for any one of those things. And it says sleep is good, but don't love it. Love not sleep, lest thou come to poverty. And then it says, open your eyes. So it's kind of the idea of wake up, go back to work, go do the thing you need to do, and you will be satisfied with bread. Now, I want you to see some of these other passages, because the New Testament, I don't know what was going on in the New Testament. If I could guess, it's probably similar to what we see today. But in the New Testament, Paul actually has to write to some churches, and he threatens to basically say, like, these guys are like at the verge of being heretics. Like, I mean, he has some very sharp words to say, like almost church discipline level stuff for people who were refusing to work. And I want you to see this. Look at 2 Thessalonians. 2 Thessalonians has some, again, some very severe things to say, and we've talked through some of this. But look at 2 Thessalonians. It's a hard thing to say today. 2 Thessalonians, look at chapter 3, and we'll start off in verse 6. 2 Thessalonians chapter 3, verse 6, it says, "Now, we command you, brethren, in the name of our Lord Jesus Christ, that you withdraw from every brother who walks disorderly." And so I want you to see this idea of this disorderly. Okay? Follow this term, because this term is about to be used. And he says, you mark the people who walk disorderly, and disorderly requires separation. You don't put up with it. And I want you to notice how he defines this word disorderly just a few verses later. So we can use the Bible to interpret the Bible. So like we think about the word disorderly, and we think of like, oh, someone who's disorderly in the church. They're causing chaos, and they're gossiping, and they're not submitting to authority. Okay, maybe, but why don't we let Paul determine what this word means? And so if we look here in 2 Thessalonians 3, he says, hey, you need to withdraw from every brother that walks disorderly, not after the tradition you received from us. Okay, so first thing is, he taught them some things and they're not following it. Let's see what he taught them. Verse 7, Paul then points to himself and says, I am giving you an example of how to live. For you ourselves know you ought to follow us, for we have not ourselves walked disorderly among you. So he uses this word again, and he says, okay, guys, separate from the disorderly. You know that we did not live disorderly. What does disorderly mean? Look at verse 8. Neither, we didn't walk disorderly, we were not eating any man's bread for naught. So he's basically saying, okay, we're not freeloading. We had the opportunity to. We could have, but we worked. He said, we did not take man's bread for naught, but we wrought with labor and travail night and day, that we might not be chargeable unto any of you. So he's saying, we worked our tail off, not because we had to, but because we wanted to be an example. And here's what you see. He says this guy saying, we worked. And that's how you know we were not walking disorderly. And look where he keeps going, not verse 9. Not because we have not our power. He's like, we had the power to not do all this. But we wanted to make ourselves an example unto you to follow us. So Paul is saying, separate from the brothers who walk disorderly. We did not walk disorderly. And you know we weren't walking disorderly because look at what we did. Not because we had to, but because we wanted to be a good example. And then look where he goes from here. He says, for even when we were with you, we commanded you that if any should not work, neither should he eat. This echoes what we just saw in Proverbs 20, where he says, hey, don't you love sleep? Open your eyes and you'll be satisfied with bread. It's the same idea. Go get to work and you will have bread and you'll be satisfied with the bread that you have because you had to earn it. I don't know about you, but when I've been an hourly worker, which has not happened a whole lot, most of the time it's salary, which has some benefits, as you know, but then there's other times where you're like, I worked way more than 40 hours this week, and I get paid nothing extra. Yeah, I don't know if anyone else has that grief with salary. But that was my life for a long time. I was a salary worker, so I never got extra. All the extra work you did. But there were times where I kept track of roughly how much I was paid per hour. And then when you go and buy that item, and you're looking at that item going, that item was 3 hours of my life. That item was not as satisfying as I thought that item would be. But then there's something about it where you're like, no, actually, that was cool. I worked for that. And you know that difference, you know. And there are some times where you buy that thing and you're like, oof, half an hour of my life just went away to buy that coffee. That one hurt, you know. And then there's other times where you're like, that was like 2 minutes of my life. I could do that. That's good. And look what he's saying. He says, if you're not working, what are you doing? What are you doing? And then he goes further, verse 11. He says, for we hear that there are some which walk among you disorderly. So again, he comes right back to that same term, and he says, all right, guys, don't be disorderly, separate from the disorderly. We did not walk disorderly. And I hear that there are those people around you who are disorderly. And we have all of our own definitions that we glom onto that term. But Paul has just used that term 4 different times in this passage. And multiple times he ties it directly to work. And he says this, there are people who walk among you who are disorderly. They're working not at all, but they're busybodies. And so what has he done now? He has taken this concept and he's tied it back around to this problem and said, you see, there's a connection. Because what does busyness do? Busyness keeps you from sin. Busyness keeps you from sin. Because when you're too busy and you're too tired to go out and sin, you tend to just go to bed. And then you're like, oh, yeah, I don't have time to sit there and talk to you about everyone else's problems because I'm too tired. And that's what he's saying here. He's saying, guys, you got a bunch of people in your church who aren't even working. And they're just going house to house. And they're gossiping with each other. And he says, you need to knock it off. You're being disorderly. You see that guy show up at your doorstep at, 10 a.m. in the morning, and you're going, why aren't you at work? I don't work. Well, maybe you should go get a job, because you certainly don't have time to be sitting here gossiping to me. Get out of here. Separate from the brothers who walk disorderly, who are not working, and who are busybodies. Because what happens? You're not working, and now you have a whole lot of time to go sin. And he's saying, no. And that's why Paul is doing this. And that's why Paul did his work. Paul was working his tail off. I think we could all agree. Paul had racked up the hours. All right? Paul did not owe anyone any extra work. And he did tent making on the side. So Paul was served by the churches, traveling around, doing tent making. He was doing all this stuff. He could go, you know what? I'm going to take a day off because I deserve it. But he goes, no. I'm going to show you by example I'm not this guy. And look where this wraps up. He says, now, them that are such, walking disorderly, busybodies, them that are such, we command, and we exhort by the Lord Jesus Christ, that with quietness they work and eat their own bread. And that's not a politically correct statement, all right? But what he's trying to say is, just be quiet and go do your work. You do not need to be a busybody. But I know the temptation. In fact, as you study out later on, you'll see some passages. He talks about widows. And he even says, hey, you got a widow in your church? If she's young enough to go get remarried, because otherwise the church is going to take care of her and she's going to become a busybody too. And that's part of why Paul says, you will not accept widows that are not a certain age. And that's why he also says, families, you need to take care of your widows. And if there's a family that refuses to take care of their widow, they're basically a heretic. And that's the sharp rebuke he has, because he's trying to say, we don't need a bunch of people just sitting around being busybodies. We need people who are busy about work. Now that work could be work for the kingdom. That work could be other things. It does not have to be like, I'm a salary man who's bringing home the bacon. He's like, no, God will take care of all that. But you need to find work to do. I'll tell you, when I was unemployed for a few months there, I took up the hobby of starting to work with various crafting things. So I started learning how to work with resin. I started planning out and I started writing, because I was like, I need to find something to do to stay busy. It paid me nothing. All of that work still pays me nothing, but I still do it. All right, so even in addition to teaching and pastoring, I still do a lot of writing and it's just stuff that keeps me busy. And what that's doing is it's saying, you need to keep working whether you're making money from it or not. And if you're going to come and you're going to beg for food and all that, you better be working, and then the church can say, okay, we'll help you. And that's the principle that this is all built on. Now, there's a lot more we could say, but that's about all the time we have for tonight. Lord willing, we'll continue this series next week, but we'll see how we go. Okay, questions or comments on these two, or I guess we could go all the way back to last week with those points. Any questions? Joseph?
Yeah, you mentioned, I think that's a good point. So, for example, the Levitical priesthood, it was 25 years. So from 25 to 50 was a priest's lifespan of work. And after 50, he had to get out of there because of to be a priest was hard work.
Yeah.
So I work with a lot of guys that, I did the work for 10 years and my lungs are shot. And it's okay to get out of that, but you have to find something to do. And that's kind of like what I'm getting at, the
Yep.
point I'm getting. So you could have a good retirement, you can, but what you're saying is just to keep busy. That's the biblical,
Yeah.
Okay.
So my dad, he worked as the head of, he was the head of maintenance, electrician. That's what he did for a living for 60 years. He retired, but now he basically has become a lumberjack. So here my 80-year-old dad's out in the woods doing all that, building, repairing stuff at the church. He just goes, I don't know that guy rests, but that's the idea. He's not saying you have to do the same job forever, but it's the idea of make sure you're keeping busy, make sure you're keeping working. And I think that's good to know. I had a friend who was a floorer, and he was like, yeah, you burn out your knees in 15 years. And by the time you know what you're doing, it's time to pass it off to the novice who does the work and you run the business because your knees are destroyed. He's not saying an 80-year-old guy has to be down on his knees doing flooring because that's what I chose to do for a living. You change jobs and All right, any other things? Mike.
I just wanted to comment that it's remarkable how well you have described current society, the world.
Yep.
I don't know what words you would, the citizens of such and such city or the state or the nation.
Yeah.
And all of that is just so disorderly.
That's the timelessness of the scriptures. It is astounding how many of these things right here, this is our culture right now. And this is what all of our kids and grandkids are being steeped in. And we need that wisdom from Proverbs to come back in and say, readjust. I preached the sermon through Titus one time, and it's astounding to look at the island of Crete and what they were known for, and you're like, this is modern day America. Like the island of Crete, and where Titus is going to find faithful men who are not this, you're like, that is modern day America. And it is amazing how, though technology has changed, nothing about people has changed. It's all the same wisdom we need to know. So, yeah, disorderly, I think, is a very good word to tuck away. Any other questions or comments? Martha?
I like how you put it in the view about grabbing a dog by its ear. I never thought of it like that. But I never grabbed a dog by its ears and bit that happening. Yeah.
But that's the beauty of Proverbs, though, because Proverbs is like a walking parable, where Proverbs is going to use illustrations that we would be like, I would never do that. And it's like, yes, but this thing you would do is exactly like that. And we're like, I got you now.
Exactly.
Because, yeah, we would never grab a dog by the ears,
No.
unless you're very naive. I may have gripped it. Anyway, but we probably would meddle with things that aren't our business.
That's right.
And that's what the Bible's trying to say is,
Yes.
you wouldn't grab a dog by the ears because you think that was stupid. But if you meddle with someone else's problem and it's none of your business,
Yep.
that's just as stupid. It's just not as physically painful right away,
Exactly. Yes. I like that.
Anything else? These have been good.
And about the widow.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, so the Bible I believe it puts the widow at 65.
Oh, wow.
It's 55 or 65, and it specifically says you are not to accept a widow into the congregation who's not above a certain age, because before then she could go get remarried. So if she's really needy, if she's needy enough, she'll find herself a husband. But also if she has no living family, because if she has living family, it's that family's job to take care of their mom. And it says if they refuse to take care of her, then they are to be cast out. Because it's basically saying, if you are not faithful enough to take care of your own family, what's wrong with you? And that's what the Bible's trying to address is care for your own, take care of your own family. I know it's a burden, but if you trust God to take care of you, you will trust God for you to take care of your family. And that's what he's trying to get their attention, because he says it is not the church's responsibility to then just take on every unmarried woman. Now, I know our compassion kicks in, and we have to do some, but he's addressing that to say, if they've got living family, they need to be the ones to do it. And so it's very interesting to kind of follow this line of thought through Paul's writings. Maybe we'll address it eventually, but he does specifically give an age and says, you are not to accept a widow into the church. Basically, if she can get remarried, she needs to. I actually have a friend who she's probably in her 70s or 80s, and her husband died a few years ago. And she actually just recently got remarried. She met a guy at church, and I mean, they're well up there in age, and he's a great guy. It's great to see. But she just got remarried this last Christmas. She's probably in her 70s or 80s. Yeah. I'm friends with her son. Her son and I work together. And so they were like, yep, I got a new dad. This is strange. And it's great. Like, I've met the guy. He's a great guy. Love her. I worked with her for a few years too. And it's like, I'm so glad for you. But her husband died actually during COVID. And so she went and got remarried. And it was interesting, and that happens. So, all right, any final questions or comments? We're coming up on the top of the hour. I don't want to keep you guys too late. I know we've got a lot of stuff going on.